I was interviewed a couple of times this morning by some BBC presenters, and they were asking me about the new Gaza Board of Peace. And we were mostly talking about the executive committee, the two executive committees. There are two. One is called the executive committee, one is called the founding executive committee. And there's a huge overlap in membership between the two. It looks very much as though two different people were given lists and told to create the executive committee, and they both did it. And I was asked about Tony Blair, and I said Tony Blair was not much use as the envoy to the Middle East for the quartet, as it was called. He spent a lot of years occupying a whole floor of the American Colony Hotel in Jerusalem and not getting a lot done. And my BBC interviewers reasonably asked, what about Northern Ireland? And I said, yeah, when he was Prime Minister, with the whole British civil service and the diplomatic service and the good offices of George Mitchell from the United States, the American senator, he was able to get a good result. And on the executive committee of the Gaza Peace Board, I didn't hold out a lot of hope. General Jasper Jeffers, the American Special Forces two-star, who is meant to be commanding the stabilization force, sounds like a great appointment. He's coming from Lebanon, where he's been working at the Israel-Hezbollah interface. But he hasn't got any soldiers yet. We don't know what the troop contributing nations are going to offer to the stabilization force. But here's the thing, they were supposed to go and supervise the disarming of Hamas, and it's very clear now that Hamas will not be disarmed by anybody except, of course, perhaps the Israelis. Hamas are not going to willingly be disarmed, so that means if there is a stabilization force of international forces, they are going to be providing a buffer between Israel and Hamas. And would you want to be a buffer between Israel and Hamas? Because resuming hostilities is I would suggest, pretty inevitable. Overall, the theme of these interviews was that we've got a fantasy football league giving us some really interesting senior people who are going to be rebuilding Gaza. We've got some billionaire property developers, American and Israeli. We'll have the Turks and the Qataris there so that someone can pick up the phone and talk to Hamas leadership. The Emiratis will be there. Everybody except, oddly, the Palestinians. So that was the executive committee and the founding executive committee of the Peace Board. Lots of high-powered people, no real guts for implementation. And while I was uploading the video, I saw that the Israeli government has said, never mind the executive committee, the Peace Board itself is not acceptable. And it's breaking Israel's understanding of what the post-war Gaza setup was going to be. This is probably an objection to having the Turks and the Qataris there, but there hasn't yet been clarity. So if anybody thought that the announcement of the Gaza Peace Board was a sign that we were going to complete step one, phase one of the Israel-Gaza ceasefire, that is the disarming and deportation of Hamas, there's not a lot of that in prospect. And moving on to the phase of actually rebuilding Gaza and creating this sort of technocratic, non-Hamas, non-Palestinian authority government doesn't seem to be going anywhere either.